Hello and welcome to this presentation on mock interviews. My name's Abby and I'm from an organisation called the AIM Group, and I've been invited today to speak to sixth form students from the Sandon High School to talk to you about mock interviews. So I am here today on behalf of the Department for Education, and we deliver the Ask programme. This programme provides sessions to young people all about apprenticeships, skills and knowledge to help you prepare and successfully apply for apprenticeship vacancies or employment opportunities in the future. So without further ado, let's get into the presentation. So, what we will be covering today, we'll look at what an interview is, what happens, some interview preparation that you can do, typical questions and how to answer them, mock interview role play, buzzwords, feedback, and what we will do, because this is a pre-recorded video, you may have additional questions that you have after today's session. You are more than welcome to drop your careers advisor, Mrs. Woods, a email address or contact your teachers and they will support you moving forward. So let's get into the first topic, which is what is an interview? Now, I'm sure many of you on the call or watching today's presentation will be aware of what an interview is, but it's always good to check our understanding. So an interview, it is actually a form of an assessment. It can be a formal interview where you are meeting somebody for the first time. And this is really an opportunity for an employer to meet with a potential candidate and assess their skills and suitability for the job. It's used by employers who are looking to hire, and it's an opportunity where employers ask you a series of questions. It is a good chance for both parties to get to know each other. And what we would really encourage you to do is, although you might feel that you are under interview, we would also say use it as an opportunity to interview the employer as well. So, what we mean by this is ask questions. It's as much an opportunity for you to get to know them as it is for them to get to know you. It is also a chance for you to show that you are the right and best candidate for the role. So it's an opportunity for you to really sell yourself and show that you are the best candidate. So, what about different types of interview? I want you to think for a couple of moments. There are different methods or different ways that we might be interviewed. What are they? So let's have a look at the potential interviews we might face as a job hunter or an apprenticeship seeker. So we can have the most familiar interview, which would most likely be a face-to-face interview. Face-to-face interviews is where there is one person interviewing you, and it will be yourself and the interviewer. Quite formal, face-to-face at the business or at the organisation that you are applying for. Secondly, you might have a panel interview. Okay, this is a form of interview where you have more than one interviewer. So there may be a series of people, up to 3 to 4 people sitting in front of you, asking you different questions. A group interview, not to be confused with a panel interview. A group interview is typically a discussion, usually as part of an assessment centre day with other applicants, where you will be in a controlled environment where you've been invited in face to face or online to undertake a series of group activities, and you will be almost competing with other candidates who are potentially applying for the same job. A telephone interview, really common. Often we see telephone interviews used to get to know the candidate. You may find that you have a telephone interview first and then you're invited in for an additional interview. And then lastly, video or virtual interviews. And post-COVID, we've definitely seen organisations and businesses using the advantages of technology to make their recruitment process completely virtual or online. So there are two types of video interviews. One could be a pre-arranged video interview on Zoom or Microsoft Teams, very similar to a face-to-face interview where you are asked questions directly with somebody speaking back to you. Although there is another type of virtual interview, which is where there is not another person at the end of the video, it is a computer. So typically we find lots of large organisations like the police, NHS, finance companies use what we call virtual interviews, where they will ask you to log on to a portal or platform. You'll be shown a question and then a menu will pop up with a camera and a time in the corner, and it will give you a couple of minutes to prepare your answer, and it will automatically record you giving your answer directly back to the camera. Now, it's a really bizarre situation if you've kind of never done that before. Ultimately, you feel like you're talking to yourself, but there is really clever technology nowadays, such as artificial intelligence and applicant tracking systems used by recruitment firms to use this particular method of interview. It is more than likely that once you've passed the video interview round, you may be asked to attend a group assessment centre or a face-to-face interview following that initial stage. So that's a quick whistle-stop tour of the different types of interviews. Let's have a look. We'll just go into a little bit more detail about telephone interviews. Typically, this is used to screen candidates. Now, what I mean by the term screening candidates is often employers receive hundreds of applications for one job vacancy. Sometimes they would like to whittle down the candidates into a more manageable pile. So, what they may do is undertake a telephone interview often before you're invited in before a face-to-face or video interview. This gives the employer the opportunity to get to know you and ask some eligibility questions and initial interview questions. You may find that a telephone interview is less formal than a formal face-to-face interview, but we would still encourage you to be professional, use appropriate language, and try and be as relaxed as possible. Top tips here is make sure you answer those pesky, unknown callers. Sometimes we think that they're just spam, but many businesses may call on an unknown number. Also, it's really important to keep a track of who you've applied to. There's nothing worse than being unsure on the phone of what the opportunity actually is. So make sure you try and keep a track, whether that's via a spreadsheet or on your notes on your phone, keeping a track of the apprenticeship vacancy or the job role that you've applied for and the business, so that when they call and say who they're calling from, you remember that you applied to that opportunity. If you are ever out and about and you can't take that call, it's absolutely fine to say, I'm sorry, I'm outside right now, or I'm in a busy shopping centre. Please, can you give me a call back? Then that is absolutely fine. Just make sure that you do give your telephone number and a more convenient time to call. Ideally, say, can you call me back in the same day, a little bit later? I'll be home in 20 minutes because you don't want to miss out on that opportunity. Keep polite at all times, and a telephone interview really is a great way for you to kind of get to know the employer in those initial stages. Like we said, a video interview has become one of the most common ways to also interview candidates now in a post-COVID world. Many employers found the advantages of interviewing people from the comfort of their own home. It was less time consuming and it meant that they could interview more people in one go. So we're definitely not seeing the video interview go away anywhere. These are some of our top tips in terms to help you get prepared. So take a browse through some of the advice on the page there. Some of the advice includes setting up and making sure no technical issues and making sure you're in a quiet space. We would encourage you to have a read through this checklist, and if you are ever invited in for an interview, have a look at ticking a few of these things off off before you start. So, really, with interviews, a preparation is key. Preparation will allow you to be more confident as a candidate and feel prepared, and ultimately do more to do well, sorry, in your interview. So, let's have a look. Tips for preparing. This may all seem pretty obvious, but it's good to remind ourselves. So, preparing is all about making sure that you've got the information and you know where you're meant to be at what time. So, making sure you arrive on time, planning your journey, understanding whereabouts it is that you're expected to go if it is a face to face interview. Always remember to be polite and friendly when you are at your interview. It's always a good tip to pause and think about your answers. Try not to rush, allow your brain time to process what they're asking you. Always good to remember people's names, stay focused, and try and keep eye contact as much as possible. So, those are some tips there. Again, we've got some more tips that you might want to have a look at, all about when you are given the interview date the night before and what you should do just before an interview. I want you to take a moment to think about what we've just seen on the screen and on the current slide right now. Is there a particular tip that you will take on board or a piece of advice that you think is spot on when it comes to making sure that you are prepared and ready to present the best version of yourself at that interview? So if you can see on the worksheet, you'll see there is a activity there. I would encourage you to have a look at those tips and pick one or two tips that you think you can take with you into your preparation. Okay, so moving on. Let's think about what else we can do to prepare ourselves for the interview. So, researching the company. You've probably heard this being spoke about when you hear, what can I do to really impress an employer? How can I show that I am a great candidate for the role? And part of that could be making sure that you have undertaken sufficient research about the company. So, there's lots of different ways we can do this. We can look at their website, we can check out their social media pages, or we can do some research by Googling them, seeing what comes up in the news, checking out any reports or data about the company. In particular, what we want you to think about when you are researching an employer is, how did you find out about the vacancy? Where was the job vacancy advertised? What do you already know about the company? And what research can you do to prepare for the interview? What do you think that employer may be expecting you to initially know about the company? And why do you want to work for that particular company? Is there something special? Is there a unique selling point about that potential company? Yeah, undertaking research. So, there are different ways that you can research a company before you start your application or before you attend an interview, and building up a picture of maybe the products and the services that they offer will give you a great picture of who they are as a business, what sector or industry they work in, but also in developing a sense of the way they work and their values. This will sometimes be referred to as their vision or mission statement. It's super important to make sure that when you search on their company website, that you check out a page called the About Us section. Nearly every business, whether they are large or a small to medium sized employer, will have a page that talks about their business. Often, many companies, typically larger companies, will share their culture, their company's vision or mission statement. This is a couple of sentences, sometimes even a paragraph, about what's important to them as a business. They may even have company core values or a vision statement, which is a series of bullet points about what's important to them. For example, they may say that customer care is at the core of everything they do, that they are innovative and a proactive, sustainable company. They may say that they put the customer first. All of these elements are really painting a picture of the type of company that they are. So, you really want to demonstrate that you are going the extra mile. As you're researching, it can be helpful to make a note of anything useful that you discover. So, take a screenshot or write it down. It's really important that you can demonstrate in the interview that you have researched. So, any question where you're able to share an interesting fact or share the fact that you have taken the time to go on their website, it's always a great way to impress the person who might be interviewing you. So, like I said, you can visit their website, their social media channels, see if you can find out 10 key facts about the company that you want to work for. Remember, you don't need to know everything about the company, but showing an interest and making an effort to know the key things about their business. Start looking at their website, reading their latest news, and following them on social media, and you'll be able to build a good picture of the type of company they are. So, for activity number two, we'd like you to make a note from the examples 1 to 10. Which particular facts would you go about finding when you were researching into a company before you attend your interview? You can also get connected, and we would super encourage you guys to check out any potential business on their social media pages. Many companies will have not only their main channel for their main business, but they may even have a particular careers account that is all about recruitment and vacancies for their business. So you can follow these accounts to keep up to date with any latest news, and you might be able to see something interesting that they put on their social media. For example, they might share a newsletter or share a recent award that they've received within their business. Top tips also include maybe networking on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a professional social networking site where, again, you can follow people from that organization, potentially the PR team, the CEO, or other members of that business. What we would say, a word of warning, if you're going to follow or connect with somebody, do make sure you drop them a message. You can say that you are a applicant who is seeking to find out a little bit more about the business and you're researching about the company. That's absolutely fine. So, moving on to interview questions. So, that is the main theme of today's session. Interview questions are really challenging, and they can be the most nerve-wracking part. We're always wondering, what is that employer going to ask me? What am I going to be expected to talk about when I am in an interview? So, we are going to do a little bit of role play. So if you're at home or if you're watching this in your own time, if you are able to do this with a friend or family member, it always helps. But there's nothing wrong with making some notes and keeping this as a kind of practice run for yourself. So in an ideal world, if you can practice in a pair, it's brilliant because you can get some feedback from somebody else, but it's okay if you just want to make notes for this next part. So, what we would encourage you to do is think about some of those initial questions, almost like a warm up question. Many people forget that, really it's about carrying yourself in an authentic way, being able to have a conversation and say things off the top of your head. Yes, we can prepare for interviews, but it's really good to be able to have that conversation, have those communication skills, and show that you are able to articulate things about yourself. So, typical questions that you might get asked could be, tell us more about you, or tell me about yourself. What are your strengths and weaknesses? How would you describe yourself? What skills have you gained from previous work experience? What skills can you bring to the role? Do you have a long-term career goal, or where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? And what appeals to you about an apprenticeship or the potential job vacancy? So, I want you to take a couple of moments. I'd like you to take at least 2 to 3 of the questions from the list and think honestly about what you would say. Sometimes actually saying your answer out loud can really help you craft together your answer. It's all well and good having a perfectly set out answer on paper, but when it comes to saying it, you can get a little bit tongue tied. So, practicing really does make perfect. Again, it might seem silly, but if you have a mirror and you can practice saying this into the mirror, then again, you'll find that's quite an effective way of building your confidence and saying it out loud. If you've ever prepared for a presentation, you'll often know speaking out your presentation part out loud will help you feel more confident. So, a couple of moments to work through that activity if you can. And remember, if you're on your own, then you can make some notes of what you might say for these answers. Okay, moving on to typical interview questions. So we looked at the kind of initial warm-up questions that you might get asked, but here's some more questions that may be a little bit more tricky. Often questions that ask you to think about your previous work experience, your skills, your qualities, or even your qualifications. So have a look at this slide here and see some of the typical interview questions that you may get asked during an interview. What's really good is if you can build a bank of interview questions that you think you might get asked during your interview, then you can work backwards and prepare so you can have a list of notes for potential answers, and it really helps you to think about what you might actually say for these questions. Okay, so moving on to the next slide, we can actually group interview questions into different categories. Now, some of you might not be aware, but employers will ask you different types of questions to really get to understand you as a person. An employer is trying to understand where your strengths are, where your skills are, but also who you are as a person, your personality traits, your morals, and your values. So, we have a variety of different type of questions they might ask you. We've got strength-based questions, which really explore the applicant and what you enjoy doing or what you do well. And it might ask you about your potential strengths or skills. So they might ask you what motivates you, who do you admire most, or when do you feel most inspired? They might also ask you, what do you think your strengths are? What are your key skills? Technical based questions are really there to understand job related knowledge and understanding of work processes. So they may ask you about a particular program or a piece of equipment or a hard skill. So, for example, they might ask you, can you tell me how you would use Excel to store data? Can you tell me how to use, can you tell me how you would use PowerPoint to present data? Those are just two examples there, but you can kind of understand when it is a technical based question. Situational judgment questions are there to test how applicants would react in work situations and the ability to problem solve. So, for example, you might have a question like, what would you do if, for example, what would you do if a manager asked you to perform a task you'd never done before? Again, this is to kind of capture what you might do in that potential situation, your reactions, your aptitude, and your personality. Value-based questions are typically used in health and social care jobs, but also used in areas and industries such as the police, public uniform services, the NHS, and even financial or retail companies. These questions are typically used to understand your values and to help see whether you would fit in with that company's culture. So you might have a question like, can you tell me about a disagreement you had within a team and how did you handle it? And lastly, motivational questions. This is really to help the employer see what drives you, what motivates you as an applicant. And again, are you a right fit for the company? So where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? So, those are some of the typical types of questions you might get asked. There is another style of questioning that is most common in interviews. This is called competency based questions. Just take a moment. What do you think this line of questioning is relating to? Competency based questions. So, competency-based questions are questions that require you to provide a real life example as the basis of your answers. Examples you can use can be from your school life, sixth form life, your personal life, life experiences that you've had, extracurricular activities. Many employers use competency-based interviews to determine whether a potential employee has specific skills related to the position. Being prepared for a competency-based question is really important in order to succeed in this kind of interview. You have to have a lot of examples and scenarios up your sleeve and be confident in talking about those particular experiences. Becoming familiar with this style of questioning can help you to become more confident in the interview process, and it's important to take time to prepare for this type of interview to help you better understand the specific key competencies that that employer may be looking for. It's important to structure and practice answering commonly asked interview questions so that you can properly prepare for an interview. Often, the job description, the job advert, or the apprenticeship vacancy advert will talk about the specific competencies that that employer is looking for. So make sure you read through the job advert carefully, highlighting any specific skills or qualities or attributes that that employer is outlining in the job advert. Then you can use that advert to understand what kind of questions they might ask you at interview. So, typical competency based questions. There is a clue to tell if it is a competency based question, and that is that it will often have the phrase, "Can you tell me a time when?" Or "Can you demonstrate when?" Or "Can you give me an example when?" And often you will see competency based questions written like the examples on the slide here. They will potentially highlight a particular skill. So they might talk about teamwork, organizational skills, leadership, ability to work under pressure. And the question will want you to provide an example when you have successfully completed that particular task or shown that you have that skill. So let's have a look at how we can prepare, because competency-based questions are one of the hardest type of questions to answer. So having a technique or tool to help you can really help you feel more confident in crafting your answers. So we use a technique called the STAR technique to really help you craft and draft an answer together. This is a structure that you can use to ensure that you are answering all elements of the competency-based question. So have a look on the slide and see what the acronym STAR stands for. We have situation, task, action, and result. Take a few minutes to read through what each section stands for, and it will help you understand how best to put your answer together. You can take a screenshot of the slide here, as it will help you for one of the activities shortly. So, competency-based questions, let's actually try at answering some of these and maybe even coming up with our very own answers. So you can see here we've got an example to the first question. Can you provide an example of a time you have successfully handled conflict in the workplace? And if we look to the example on the screen, an example of a time when I have successfully handled conflict is when I was in my previous job. I had a customer who wanted to return an item without a receipt. They got angry because I informed them that they would not be able to get a refund if they didn't have a receipt. So, what I've done there, you'll see, is I've set the scene. I've given them the situation that I was in. I've also underlined the fact that I've repeated back the question. That really makes sure that I am making sure that I am on track, and that my answer is going to relate to what the interviewer is asking me. Then I move on to the T, I move on to the task, what I had to do. I had to calm the customer down and explain the refund process to them. Action, the actions, I'm now going to outline what I did to resolve that conflict. So you'll read there in the final kind of bit of that paragraph how I explain what I did in order to resolve the conflict. If you can see there, I've highlighted in green every time I use the verb I. I did this, I listened, I used, I decided, I communicated, I understood, I tried to. This is where I am showing to the employer the action that I took. Now, often when we're answering competency-based questions, especially when we're talking about what we did in a team, we often say we did this and we did that. And it's really important that you can confidently explain to an employer what you did and try and take some of the credit for the actions that you took. The employer doesn't want to know what you did as a team. They want to know specifically the actions that you took within that situation. And then finally, I talk about the result. And I always try and talk about a positive result, and explain to them how the situation was resolved. Now, a lot of the time people say, but Abby, what about if the result wasn't too positive? And that's the kind of realistic portrayal in the scenario sometimes. You can say, unfortunately, that time the conflict wasn't resolved. However, if I was to be in that situation again, this is what I would do better. And we can also use that R as result or reflection. So again, if it didn't quite go to plan, what would you do in the future to improve that situation? So for one of the final activities in today's presentation, what I would like you to do is spend some time answering and crafting together a example for one or two of these competency-based questions. Pick from the list there, and I want you to see if you can use the STAR technique in order to get together your very own effective answer. So, a couple of minutes there to give that a go. And the best thing you can do to see whether your answer has managed to use situation, task, action, and result or reflection is on your activity sheet. You'll see we have written out the acronym, and you can kind of put the situation, task, action, and result down in each category. So I hope you found that useful. This is really one of our top tips. We would really encourage you to use the STAR technique. It often helps you calm your nerves, helps you put together your answer. You want to imagine answering an interview question is just like answering an exam paper question. You would always structure your answer with a beginning, middle, and an end. And the same with any interview answer that you're giving. Try and give it a structure. By following the STAR technique, you'll find that your answer flows a little bit better and that you're showing to the employer all areas of the question. Okay, moving on. You may very well find that buzzwords are used during an interview or even on your very own job advert or apprenticeship advert that you're looking at. We often see buzzwords like flexible, adaptable, organised, motivated. These are words that are used by employers, and these are talking about skills or strengths or attributes that they are seeking in their potential employees. So, always remember when you're talking about yourself or your strengths to try and include some of the buzzwords that they may have used in the job advert. A job advert might say, we are seeking a flexible, adaptable, enthusiastic customer service assistant who is motivated and a team player. So that's in the job advert. They are spelling out to us the kind of attributes and characteristics that they are seeking in a potential employee. So if you get asked a question like, for example, what are your strengths? Then it's a prime opportunity for you to really sell to the employer that you are the right person that they are looking for. So making sure that you incorporate these buzzwords in your answers can really help spell out to that employer that you are the right fit for the role. And lastly, these are my top tips This is a recap of everything we've kind of spoken about in today's presentation. So, first and foremost, prepare, read the job description carefully. Use this to help you identify potential questions they might ask you. For example, do they mention any skills or qualities? If they do, then we can imagine this may be asked as a competency based question. So, also, what we would really encourage you to do is research the company as much as possible. Remember, like we said, you're not expected to know everything, but knowing some key facts can be super impressive. And lastly, ask questions. A lot of the time, we feel like we are under a lot of pressure. We're getting asked all of the questions, but at the end of an interview, there will always be an opportunity for the candidate to ask questions back to the interviewers. So it's a good idea to think about what kind of question you might ask. It shows to the employer that you are keen, interested, engaged, and proactive. Here are some examples of questions you could ask. You could ask, what would you say are the best three things about working here? You could ask, can you tell me what it's like working in this particular role? Can you tell me what a typical day might be like? You can also ask about potential projects that they're working on, or anything really that shows your interest in the company. Do try and shy away from talking about salary or benefits. Often these will be explored on the company website or on the job advert. If you do want to talk about salary, potentially talking with the HR team or the recruitment team, instead of actually during your interview. Sometimes when it comes to salary, they might ask you what your salary expectation is, and there's an opportunity for you to kind of give a figure of what you are hoping to receive. But we would always say stick to positive based questions. Okay, and lastly, this slide is really interesting to see what employers are actually looking for. And these are a couple of comments from employers who are hiring potential apprenticeship vacancies. And this is just a little snippet of what some of them have to say. And then moving on to finally, we would always encourage you to make notes about the feedback that you might be potentially given. So, even if the interview was unsuccessful, we'd always encourage you to drop the interviewer or the HR team an email and ask for some formal or written feedback. Ask what went well. And if you aren't able to receive feedback, because sometimes, unfortunately, not every business is able to provide feedback if you're unsuccessful, why don't you do some self reflection? Think about what went well, what could go better next time, and are there any key things that you want to take forward into your next potential interview? So, if you're looking for more information, help, and advice in terms of future apprenticeship applications or careers and employability advice, then we'd encourage you to check out these pages of our websites, such as theapprenticeships.gov.uk and amazingapprenticeships.com. On here, you'll find lots of useful tips, guides, video content, and information for students to view. So, do scan the QR code and it will take you directly to those website pages. And lastly, another QR code for you. If you are seeking information, advice, and guidance, and you're not sure about what your next step could possibly be once you finish sixth form, then it's important to explore the different routes available to you, such as apprenticeships, higher and degree apprenticeships, employment and training opportunities, or even further or higher education. So, again, scan the QR code here to take you to the government website for further information and advice. And lastly, if you are a fan of podcasts, we do have our very own podcast called The Inspiration Station. We would encourage you to give it a listen. It's an opportunity to hear from employers and apprentices directly, to hear what it's like to be an apprentice and hear from employers about their top tips in their industry. That's everything for today's session. We would really ask for your feedback on how you felt the presentation was. Did you find it informative and helpful? And is there anything we can do to improve it for next time? So, if you can take a moment to fill out the student evaluation form, today's presentation was provided to you by Abby from the AIM group, and it was a presentation on mock interviews, preparing your application. Today, I hope you found the information useful. If you do have any questions, then please pass these on to your teachers or to your careers advisor at your school, and I can follow up with them afterwards.